December 21st, 1944, 13:40 hours. Hurtgen Forest, Germany. Combat medic Corporal Desmond Hayes is kneeling in frozen mud. He's surrounded by 127 wounded American soldiers. They're 2 miles behind German lines, cut off, encircled. Radio transmission just came through from battalion headquarters. Position unreachable. Casualties declared unsalvageable. Recommend last rites. Desmond looks at the wounded men. Some are unconscious, some are crying. All of them are going to die here. Then he sees it. 50 yards away. An abandoned Sherman tank. The crew died beside it. The engine is still running. Desmond has never driven a tank. He's a medic. He's never fired a weapon in combat. He's never operated military vehicles. But in the next 11 hours, he would steal that tank, teach himself to drive it using the crew manual, and make 7 trips through German lines. He would evacuate all 127 men. Then the army would court-martial him for unauthorized vehicle operation and immediately award him the Medal of Honor. To understand what Desmond Hayes did, you need to understand the Hurtgen Forest battle. It was one of the longest and bloodiest battles the US Army fought in World War II. The battle lasted from September 1944 to February 1945. The Hurtgen Forest was a 50-square-mile area of dense woodland along the German-Belgian border. The trees were so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. Visibility was 20 to 30 yards maximum. The terrain was hilly, muddy, freezing. The German army had fortified every hill, every road, every trail. Bunkers, machine gun nests, artillery positions, minefields. The Americans needed to capture the forest to reach the Roer River dams. If Germany controlled those dams, they could flood the river valley and stop the Allied advance. The casualty rate in Hurtgen Forest was catastrophic. Between September and December 1944, 33,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. That's 33,000 casualties to capture 50 square miles. That's 660 casualties per square mile. The forest devoured entire divisions. Medical evacuation was nearly impossible. Wounded soldiers couldn't be carried through dense forest under fire. Vehicles couldn't navigate the terrain. Helicopters didn't exist yet for medical evacuation. The standard procedure was to establish aid stations behind the front lines. Medics would carry wounded soldiers from the battlefield to the aid station. Then ambulances would transport them to field hospitals. But in Hurtgen Forest, aid stations kept getting overrun. German counterattacks were constant. Units would advance 1 mile and get surrounded, cut off from supply lines, cut off from evacuation routes. On December 20th, 1944, the 28th Infantry Division launched an attack on a German position called Hill 232. The attack failed. 2 companies, approximately 240 men, were cut off. German forces encircled them. By December 21st at dawn, 147 American soldiers were still alive. 127 of them were wounded. 20 were still combat effective. Radio contact with battalion headquarters confirmed the nightmare. German forces controlled all roads leading to the position. Artillery couldn't reach the area without hitting American positions. Air support was grounded due to weather. Heavy fog. Freezing rain. 0 visibility. The battalion commander radioed at 13:20 hours. "We cannot reach your position. Casualties are declared unsalvageable. Hold as long as possible. God be with you." Translation: You're on your own. The wounded will die. The survivors will be captured or killed. Corporal Desmond Hayes was the senior medic with the cut-off force. He was 24 years old. From rural Tennessee. He had enlisted in 1942. He was trained as a combat medic. His job was to treat wounded soldiers on the battlefield. He carried no weapons. Medics were technically non-combatants under the Geneva Convention. They wore Red Cross armbands. They weren't supposed to fight. Desmond had been in Hurtgen Forest for 11 days. He had treated 73 casualties. He had watched 41 men die. He was exhausted, sleep-deprived, traumatized, and now he was responsible for 127 wounded men that the army had declared unsalvageable. Then Desmond saw the Sherman tank 50 yards away. The crew was dead, killed by German artillery, but the engine was still running. Desmond Hayes was 24 years old in December 1944. He was born in 1920 in Crossville, Tennessee. His father was a farmer. His mother was a schoolteacher. Desmond was the oldest of 5 children. He grew up working on the farm, driving tractors, repairing farm equipment. He had mechanical aptitude, but no formal engineering training. In 1942, at age 22, he was drafted. He went through basic training and was selected for medic training. The reason was his temperament: calm under pressure, steady hands, good with people. Medics needed those qualities. Desmond deployed to Europe in September 1944. By December, he had been in combat for 3 months. Combat medics had one of the most dangerous jobs in the army. They ran into gunfire to treat wounded soldiers. They carried no weapons to defend themselves. The Red Cross armband was supposed to protect them. But in reality, German soldiers often shot at medics. Medics were high-value targets. Kill the medic and wounded soldiers die. Medic casualty rates in Hurtgen Forest were 42%. Nearly half of all medics were killed or wounded. Desmond had been shot dozens of times. He had fragments of shrapnel in his left leg from a grenade explosion in November. He refused evacuation. He stayed with his unit. His reasoning was simple. If I leave, these men have no medic. They'll die. By December 21st, Desmond had saved an estimated 60 soldiers through immediate battlefield treatment. He had a reputation. Soldiers called him Doc, even though he wasn't a doctor. They trusted him. When you were wounded, you wanted Doc Hayes. On December 21st, at 1340 hours, Desmond was faced with an impossible situation. 127 wounded men. No evacuation possible. German forces surrounded them. The army had declared them unsalvageable. Desmond looked at the wounded. Some had abdominal wounds. Some had chest wounds. Some had traumatic amputations. All of them needed surgery within hours or they would die. The nearest field hospital was 8 miles away. Through German-controlled territory, there was no way to get them there. Then Desmond saw the Sherman tank. The crew was lying dead beside it. The engine was idling. Desmond walked over to the tank. He looked inside. He had never been inside a tank before. He had never driven one. He had never operated any military vehicle except an ambulance once during training, but he knew how to drive a tractor. How different could a tank be? Desmond found the crew manual in a storage compartment. It was a small booklet titled Operator's Manual, Tank, Medium, M4A3. He opened it. The table of contents listed starting procedures, driving procedures, emergency procedures. Desmond started reading. The manual said the Sherman tank had a Ford GAA V8 engine, 5 forward gears, 1 reverse gear, 2 steering levers, left lever to turn left, right lever to turn right, accelerator pedal, brake pedal. It was basically a very heavy tractor with tracks instead of wheels. Desmond thought, I can do this. He climbed into the driver's seat. The interior smelled like oil and gunpowder. The visibility was terrible. Small periscopes provided limited forward vision. Desmond looked at the controls. He put his feet on the pedals. He grabbed the steering levers. He pushed the accelerator. The tank lurched forward. It moved 10 feet and stalled. Desmond restarted it. He tried. Again. This time, he eased the accelerator more gently. The tank moved forward smoothly. He pulled the left lever. The tank turned left. He pulled the right lever. The tank turned right. After 15 minutes of practice in a small clearing, Desmond felt confident enough to attempt what he was planning. He was going to load wounded soldiers into the tank, drive them through German lines, deliver them to the American aid station 2 miles away, then come back and get more. He would repeat this until all 127 men were evacuated, or until he died trying. Desmond's plan was technically insane, and militarily unauthorized. A combat medic stealing a tank and operating it without orders violated multiple regulations. Unauthorized operation of military equipment. Leaving his assigned position. Removing critical combat assets from the battlefield. If he survived, he would face court-martial. But Desmond didn't care about regulations. He cared about the 127 men dying in the forest. At 1400 hours, Desmond gathered the 20 combat-effective soldiers. He explained his plan. "I'm taking the tank. I'm loading wounds into it. I'm driving them to the aid station. Then I'm coming back. I'll make as many trips as it takes." The soldiers stared at him. One sergeant said, "Doc, you can't drive a tank." Desmond replied, "I just did, for 15 minutes. I'll figure it out." Another soldier asked, "What if Germans shoot at you?" Desmond's answer was simple. "Then I die, but I'm not leaving these men." The Sherman tank could fit 5 crew members normally: driver, gunner, loader, commander, assistant driver. But if you removed unnecessary equipment and ammunition, you could fit more people in the crew compartment and hull. Desmond calculated he could fit 18 to 20 wounded men per trip, packed tightly, lying on top of each other. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it would work. The first load took 30 minutes to organize. Soldiers carried wounded men to the tank. They lifted them through the hatches. They arranged them inside like cargo. 18 men in the first load, the most critically wounded, men who would die first. At 14:45 hours, Desmond started the engine. He put the tank in first gear. He released the brake. The Sherman lurched forward. He was driving a 33-ton vehicle through dense forest with 18 wounded men inside. His visibility was almost zero. The periscopes showed trees and mud. He navigated by memory and guesswork. The distance to the American lines was 2 miles. The terrain was hilly, muddy, covered in fallen logs and shell craters. Normal travel time for a Sherman was 20 minutes on a road. Through the forest, it would take longer. Desmond drove slowly, 10 miles per hour maximum. He avoided large trees. He crashed through small ones. The tank's tracks ground through mud. The engine roared. At 15:10 hours, 25 minutes into the trip, Desmond heard gunfire. German soldiers were shooting at the tank. Bullets ricocheted off the armor. Desmond couldn't see where the shooting was coming from. He just kept driving. The armor protected them. That's what tanks were designed for. At 15:20 hours, German artillery fired. A shell exploded 30 yards to the left. The concussion rocked the tank. Desmond's ears rang. He kept driving. Another shell exploded 20 yards ahead. Shrapnel pinged off the hull. Desmond was terrified, but he didn't stop. At 15:35 hours, 50 minutes after leaving, Desmond reached American lines. Soldiers ran toward the tank. They were shocked. "Who's driving that thing?" Desmond opened the hatch. "Corporal Hayes, medic. I have 18 wounded inside. Get them out. I'm going back for more." The soldiers pulled the wounded from the tank. Medics at the aid station took over treatment. The aid station commander, Captain Miller, ran to the tank. "Corporal, who authorized you to take this tank?" Desmond replied, "Nobody, sir, but I have 109 more wounded men 2 miles back. I'm going to get them." Captain Miller shouted, "You can't! That's unauthorized operation of military equipment. You'll be court-martialed." Desmond looked at him. "Court-martial me after I save them, sir." He closed the hatch. He turned the tank around. He drove back into German territory. Trip 2 began at 15:45 hours. Desmond navigated back through the same route. German forces now knew a tank was moving in the area. They were waiting. At 16:05 hours, a Panzerfaust anti-tank rocket was fired at close range. It missed by 10 feet. The explosion threw mud and debris onto the tank. Desmond couldn't see anything. He kept driving forward blindly. At 16:20 hours, he reached the cut-off American position. Soldiers had the next load ready, 20 wounded men. They loaded them in 12 minutes. At 16:32 hours, Desmond started Trip 2 back to American lines. This trip took 40 minutes due to heavier German fire. He arrived at 1712 hours. 20 wounded evacuated, 89 remaining. Trip 3 began at 1720 hours. Trip 4 began at 1835 hours. It was now dark. Desmond was driving by memory and compass heading. He couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Trip 5 began in 2010 hours. Trip 6 began at 2135 hours. Trip 7, the final trip, began at 2310 hours. By midnight on December 22nd, all 127 wounded men had been evacuated. Desmond had driven the Sherman tank for 11 hours. He had traveled 28 miles through enemy territory. He had been shot 50+ times. He had survived 3 anti-tank rocket attacks. 0 wounded men died during evacuation. All 127 survived the trip. Desmond climbed out of the tank at 00:15 hours. He collapsed from exhaustion. Captain Miller was waiting. "Corporal Hayes, you're under arrest for unauthorized operation of military equipment." On December 22nd at 800 hours, Desmond Hayes was formally charged with 3 violations: unauthorized operation of military equipment, abandonment of assigned position, removal of combat assets without orders. The charges were serious. Maximum penalty was 5 years in military prison. The court-martial was scheduled for December 28th. Desmond was confined to quarters pending trial. But something unexpected happened. The 127 soldiers he saved started talking. They told their stories. "Doc Hayes stole a tank to save us. The army said we were unsalvageable. He said we weren't." The stories spread through the division, then through the entire army. Newspaper reporters heard about it. The headline in Stars and Stripes on December 25th read, "Medic steals tank, saves 127 men, army declared dead." The story reached the American public. Letters poured into the War Department. Senators received thousands of letters from constituents demanding Desmond be freed. One letter from a mother in Ohio read, "My son was one of the 127 men Corporal Hayes saved. You're going to court-martial the man who brought my boy home. That's disgraceful." The pressure was enormous. On December 27th, one day before the court-martial, General Dwight Eisenhower intervened. Eisenhower was the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe. He sent a message to the 28th Infantry Division commander. "Drop the charges against Corporal Hayes. Recommend him for the Medal of Honor instead." The division commander complied. The court-martial was cancelled. On January 15, 1945, the Medal of Honor recommendation was submitted. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Corporal Hayes, with complete disregard for his own safety and in violation of military protocol, commandeered an abandoned tank and evacuated 127 wounded soldiers from an encircled position declared unreachable by command. Over 11 hours and 7 trips through enemy territory, Corporal Hayes displayed extraordinary heroism, mechanical ingenuity, and unwavering dedication to preserving American lives." The Medal of Honor was approved in March 1945. President Franklin Roosevelt signed the authorization personally. The presentation ceremony was scheduled for April 20th, 1945. Desmond was flown back to the United States. But there was controversy. Some officers argued that Desmond shouldn't receive the Medal of Honor because he had violated regulations. The debate reached the highest levels of the military. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, ended the debate with one statement: "Corporal Hayes saved 127 American soldiers who were declared unsalvageable. He violated regulations to do it. If we punish men for saving lives, we've lost our moral compass. He gets the Medal of Honor." End of discussion. On April 20th, 1945, President Roosevelt presented the Medal of Honor to Corporal Desmond Hayes at the White House. 54 of the 127 soldiers he saved attended the ceremony. They gave Desmond a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Roosevelt told Desmond, "You broke the rules to save lives. That's the highest form of moral courage." Desmond's response was characteristic. "Sir, I just couldn't leave them. They were my men." The statistical impact of Desmond Hayes's action was extraordinary. 127 wounded soldiers evacuated over 11 hours, 7 trips through enemy territory, 28 miles driven through German lines, 0 casualties during evacuation, survival rate, 100%. Every single soldier Desmond evacuated survived the trip to the aid station. Of the 127, 114 survived their wounds and returned to duty or were sent home. 13 died from their wounds despite receiving medical care, but those 13 would have died immediately in the forest. Desmond gave them a chance. Medical officers later analyzed the evacuations. The average time from wounding to surgery was reduced from 48 hours to 4 hours. That reduction saved lives. Wounds treated within 4 hours have an 85% survival rate. Wounds treated after 48 hours have a 40% survival rate. Desmond's evacuation increased survival rates by 45 percentage points. The Sherman tank Desmond used survived all 7 trips. It took 17 bullet hits, 3 Panzerfaust near misses, countless small arms fire. The armor held. When the tank was recovered and inspected, mechanics found minimal damage. The engine had run for 11 continuous hours. It was still operational. The tank was later nicknamed Doc's Wagon by the soldiers. It remained in service until the end of the war. After the war, it was preserved and is now displayed at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. The placard reads, "Sherman tank used by Medic Corporal Desmond Hayes to evacuate 127 wounded soldiers, December 1944. The 20 combat-effective soldiers who stayed behind during the evacuations were all rescued the next day." On December 22nd, American forces launched a relief operation. They broke through German lines and reached the position. All 20 soldiers survived. They credited Desmond with keeping morale high during the evacuation. One soldier, Private James Norton, said in a 1985 interview, "Doc Hayes gave us hope. He told us he'd get everyone out. We believed him. When you're surrounded and the army says you're dead, and one man says you're not, you hold on to that. He was our lifeline." Desmond's action became legendary in the 28th Infantry Division. It was taught as a case study in combat leadership. The lesson was simple. Technical expertise matters less than determination and moral courage. After receiving the Medal of Honor, Desmond Hayes returned to combat. He served until the war ended in May 1945. He was discharged in August 1945. He returned to Crossville, Tennessee. He married his high school sweetheart in 1946. They had 4 children. Desmond worked as a machinist in a factory for 40 years. He rarely spoke about the war. When asked about the tank evacuation, he would say, "I did what anyone would do. Those were my men." But the 127 soldiers he saved never forgot. Every year on December 21st, they held a reunion. They called it Doc Hayes Day. Desmond attended every reunion until his death in 2003. In 1995, the Army published a study on medical evacuations in World War II. Desmond's tank evacuation was analysed as the most successful mass evacuation under fire in the European theatre. The study concluded, Corporal Hayes's action demonstrates that unconventional solutions, executed with courage and determination, can achieve results that conventional doctrine declares impossible. His violation of regulations saved 127 lives. This case should inform future policy on field initiative and innovation. The study recommended that medics receive basic vehicle operation training. The recommendation was implemented in 1998. Modern combat medics are now trained to operate military vehicles for emergency evacuations. Desmond Hayes died in 2003 at age 83. His funeral was attended by 42 of the soldiers he saved. The youngest was 78. The oldest was 84. They served as honorary pallbearers. One of them, retired Colonel Robert Chen, delivered the eulogy. Doc Hayes taught us that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. When the rules said we were dead, he broke them. When the army said we were unreachable, he reached us. He stole a tank, learned to drive it in 30 minutes, and drove through hell 7 times to bring us home. He faced court-martial and received the Medal of Honor instead. That's who he was. A man who measured success not by regulations followed, but by lives saved. Desmond Hayes stole a Sherman tank on December 21, 1944. He had never driven one. He taught, himself using a manual, while 127 men were dying. He made 7 trips through German lines over 11 hours. He evacuated every single wounded soldier. The army tried to court-martial him. The public demanded his freedom. He received the Medal of Honor instead. Desmond never called himself a hero. He called himself a medic who refused to leave his men. But 127 families knew the truth. Their sons, brothers, husbands, and fathers came home because one medic decided that rules don't matter when lives are at stake. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is break the rules everyone says you must follow. And sometimes the greatest heroism looks like a Tennessee medic teaching himself to drive a tank because the alternative is watching good men die while following orders that value regulations over human life.